Hey everyone, it's Elise. Welcome back to my channel where I like to talk about all things personal finance. And today's video is talking about how emergency funds are crucial. 2 points regarding emergency funds. The first one is going to be about how there is a situation at hand that emergency funds can save you from. And then I'm going to go over just some emergency fund facts. So the spotlight about how emergency funds are crucial in today's video is that it can save you from an eviction. And I'm not talking about your usual eviction where you fall behind and the landlord has no choice but to evict you because you aren't paying your rent. I'm talking more so about the unusual situation where the property is being sold up underneath you and you have no say because you are not an owner, you are a tenant. If you don't have an emergency fund as that tenant, you are found kind of resting on your laurels, and how an emergency fund is the antithesis of that, because an emergency fund is you saving for another day, because even though you're doing well, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So the specific situation is that we have a group of tenants that are living in Crystal Springs apartment in Roanoke, Virginia, and they are given a 30-day eviction notice. And that notice is because the building is being sold by the owner. Seeing this story and hearing what the tenants had to say about what they were going to do and how they were scrambling to, some of them were scrambling to find new housing, but some of them were scrambling to fight because they felt like their rights were being taken away from them as renters, was heartbreaking, because in my head I was like, I don't think any of these people are talking about, oh, well, I'm not down so much in my ass because I have the means to go somewhere else. None of those people were saying that. And their responses shed light on a few points that I want to go over. The first thing is that many of them were long-term renters who had been there 5 to 10 years, and them being evicted forcibly now, not because they weren't paying their rent, had them in a situation where they were feeling stuck. And them being lifelong renters was not something that struck a chord with me. I'm not one of those people that think renting long-term is a waste of money. I think renting, if you decide to do it long-term, has a place in life, and home ownership is not for everybody. Let me know in the comments what you think about renting versus buying a home and where you stand on the opinion poll. But regardless of where you stand on the I'm gonna rent or I'm gonna buy opinion poll, it is probably prudent to always have some type of moving funds. Just in case you are being made to go somewhere else, you can go a lot easier from the place you're renting to another place you're renting, not necessarily the place you're renting to become a homeowner. And that involves things like making sure you always have a fund for moving expenses. You always have a fund for 3 times the rent of another place that you may be forced to move in case you were unhoused at the location that you are at, because renting nowadays is not first and security. Renting is the first month, the last month, and security. And if you live in a metropolitan city like I do, that could easily run you $6,000 to $10,000. And it also might be prudent to have some money in a moving fund for moving, because moving is expensive. Moving is going to require a truck. Moving might require movers. Moving might require supplies. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, an emergency fund would have prevented this somewhat. Another sentiment that I saw a lot of the renters talk about in their response to the news team that was out there covering the story was that it felt like it was a heartless thing for the landlord to put them through, and that it was inconsiderate. And I have to say that I agree. Part of me, after hearing that, wanted to say it's not business, but it's personal. But I go back to the point where, like, no, I actually don't agree with it. It is inconsiderate and it is kind of heartless. The thing that I think we need to take into consideration, and is why we need to have an emergency fund anyway, is that you have to count on people being cruel to you. It's not right. They're going to tell you that it's business, not personal, and you can feel the way you want to feel, but if you're not out within 30 days and don't procure new housing in this situation because you're being evicted, how you feel doesn't stop you from being unhoused. So I think it's prudent to expect the cruelty. I think we should always fight. So sometimes that emergency fund or that moving fund should involve money for lawyer, maybe a retainer fee, a starting retainer fee, but we have to expect the cruelty and not act like it's not a possible thing that we're gonna have to deal with. For example, my HOA I'm dealing with right now, I don't expect much from them. I have to be on top of them. I don't know if it's business or not personal with them, but their actions have shown me that if I'm not on top of them, I'm gonna be living in subpar conditions. And it was only until I threatened them in a public meeting with an attorney fighting on my behalf is when they got it together. But even after that, a week later, I'm still having to stay on top of them. And they're putting me through the ringer as far as like what payment is concerned and when they're gonna pay the vendor, blase, swaze. And there's a lot of red tape. Again, I'm being proactive, I'm fighting, but I'm expecting from them to not do their part and not do the best by me. The tenants made mention that they wish they had 60 to 90 days instead of the 30-day eviction notice. And yes, that would have relieved some stress in the situation, but it was not a proactive enough sentiment because you can only expect family to be considerate and give you a little bit more time. This person has newly bought the building and he or she is just concerned about assuring their return on investment. The only people you can really count on is the family within your four walls, and sometimes you can't even depend on your family, but that's another video. The third sentiment that I was seeing a lot of the tenants explain to the news people was that they were frustrated that they were not given any more options than the one option they had, which was to move out. And I kind of wanted to scream because like an emergency fund is your other option. Simply, we have to be serious about making our other option. If it's not an emergency fund, it's probably having two jobs in this economy where these jobs are laying people off left and right. It's paying off our debt. It is building up an emergency fund. These are the things that we have to do. We have to create our other options because nobody is gonna give them to you. And you don't wanna get caught begging for other options. So in hopes of building an emergency fund, how does that get done? First, most people, when they're building an emergency fund, they have it in a completely separate account from the account that they pay their bills from, and they have regular money just sitting there. Not just sitting there, but basically paying their bills. An emergency fund is usually kept in a separate account because you don't want to intermingle with it. You want to preferably have it automatically sent from your paychecks, even if it's $20 a paycheck or $20 a month. But you want it to be separate so that it is not intermingled. Another thing and another reason why it's usually kept in a separate account is because most people keep it in a high yield savings account because high yield savings account give you higher interest than would your savings account with your regular banker that gives less than 1%. High yield savings accounts currently are giving between 3 to 4%. Next thing that you're gonna want to think about to yourself is how much do you wanna put into your emergency fund. Now, if you listen to Dave Ramsey, he only recommends having $1,000, and I would say that's the minimum amount. But according to him, the reasoning behind his $1,000 is he's big about debt payoff. If you're focused on debt payoff, then that might be prudent because that $1,000, in his opinion, is enough to stave off a lot of emergencies. And according to data that has been collected, 50% of Americans can't even come up with $400. So if you have $1,000, you're way past the $400 and you should be able to pay off your debt and not get taken off track because you've at least saved that $1,000. There's another school of thought where it's recommended that you have 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenses in your emergency fund. This recommendation is for the average person and for someone who makes an average salary. And the average salary in America, I believe, is between $50,000 and $75,000. It depends on which source, but that is the starting point for an emergency fund if you're beginning to make a goal to have 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses. And then lastly, there are some people that should consider having 6 to 12 months of their monthly expenses in an emergency fund. Those people are people who are self-employed, and that means that they're entrepreneurs or they bought in a business and they do not have a W-2 coming in, you know? That makes sense because it's riskier having your own business, there's more reward if it pops off, but it is riskier. So probably before you start the business, you should have 6 to 12 months of your expenses, because it's not like you can go to a job for resources and ask for more hours. Another demographic of people who should have probably a year's worth of savings are people who are considered C-level, or maybe not C-level executives, the executives underneath C-levels, because those positions, they're harder to come by if you lose a position. Those positions are district managers. Those positions are CEOs, CIOs, CFOs, things like that. They are more than the basic supervisor. They're your supervisors. If you tend to lose those jobs, a lot of times those people don't want to go to lower level jobs, which is understandable. But you need to wait it out a little bit more, because a lot of times when you are looking for those jobs are not where you live. They're in other cities, and you're going to probably have to relocate yourself at first and probably your family second. And it is doable, but that's why it's more prudent to have a little bit more. The good thing about it, if you're at that level, you should have the financial means to save 6 to 12 months. Keyword should. So no matter which level you find yourself wanting to make a go towards, whether it's $1,000, the 3 to 6 months, or the 6 to 12 months, having an emergency fund is crucial. And as we saw in the situation where these people were being evicted, having an emergency fund would have eased the stress of not knowing where they're going to live in 30 days, because that is triggering. I feel like unless you have family nearby, that is a really tall order to deliver, because there's so much in finding a new place to live. They want proof of income, they want proof of funds, and 30 days goes by really quick when that is something that you needed to do. And having a roof over your head is one of the most important and fortifying things a person can have. Housing, So it was so sad to see these tenants go through the anxiety of having to be rehoused in 30 days or less. And it reminded me how emergency funds are there to help us in situations like this and relieve the stress. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Let me know in the comments how your emergency fund building is going, and I will see you guys next week.